Before the Rings of Power, there were the Silmarils. Before Sauron, there was his master, Morgoth. Before Aragorn and Arwen, there was Beren and Luthien. Welcome to Window on the West, where we explore all the ages of Tolkien's Middle-earth, with your hosts, Jonathan Watson, Michael Grumbine, and Dan Coates.
It's another episode of Window on the West. I am Jonathan Watson, and I'm here along with Michael Grumbine. If you're on YouTube, he's down below. And then Dan Coates, who's over here to my left.
Hey.
Yeah. And we are here to talk about how the Noldor are returning. Kind of like the Jedi.
But, you know.
No, that's not. Yeah.
Kind of like the Jedi and the Sith all at once.
All at once there. That's a good one, yeah. The good guys and the bad guys at the same time. So we're on chapter 13 of The Return of the Noldor, the longest chapter, but we're not going through the whole thing. We're ending I would say probably about 2/3 of the way through this chapter. At the second break, if you're looking at it in the book, or third break, there are two large paragraph breaks, and we're at that third one, and then we'll go over that one next week. So, of the Return of the Noldor, and this is a momentous event because this is our first time we're going to be doing All That Is Gold Does Not Glitter without one of us actually coming up with the answers and knowing the answer beforehand. So this is done by Linnaelin on our Discord chat. They gave them to us. We have not answered these. We don't know what they are. I saw them. I had to copy and paste them. Don't know the answers or anything like that, but we really haven't looked at them at all yet. So we're kind of coming at this completely blind. So we're going to go into
All That Is Gold Does Not Glitter.
So here we go. First quote. This tale is told on the headlands. The Great One comes up from the deeps. His eye is a shrouded pearl, his voice the ocean wind. I'll read it one more time. This tale is told on the headlands. The Great One comes up from the deeps. His eye is as a shrouded pearl, his voice the ocean wind. It's essentially just so you know, 3 stanzas in the way that she pasted it into the chat. So those are the 3 stanzas.
Is this poetry?
It is. These first 2 are poetry. The next is also poetry.
Okay, that's interesting.
Harsh was the rift that the wave hewed in the wall of my father's kin. I know it stands, unfilled and open, my son's breach that the sea wrought. Yeah, definitely verse. Harsh was the rift that the wave hewed in the wall of my father's kin. I know it stands, unfilled and open, my son's breach that the sea wrought. Oh, man.
Huh.
Yeah. Okay, third one. And as he went, he saw that the sun was sinking low into a great black cloud that came up over the rim of the darkening sea. And it grew cold, and there was a stirring and murmur as of a storm to come. And as he went, he saw that the sun was sinking low into a great black cloud that came up over the rim of the darkening sea. And it grew cold, and there was a stirring and murmur as of a storm to come. All right. Fourth one. We've got 5. The nearer waves, though golden where their summits caught the light, were green on their slopes, first emerald, and lower down a lustrous bottle green, deepening to blue where they passed beneath the shadow of other waves. The nearer waves, though golden, where their summits caught the light, were green on their slopes, first emerald, and lower down a lustrous bottle green, deepening to blue where they passed beneath the shadow of other waves. All right. And then the last one. The sea is always right. Let me read that again because the laughter kind of drowned it out. This is important. The sea is always right.
Damn it.
So, I'm the one that's closest to Tolkien adjacent is this last one. The sea is, never mind. This one we'll just.
I think this is more fascist adjacent than Tolkien adjacent.
Yeah, we'll just ignore this completely. So let's go back. We know that this is not. This is from the Rings of Power. This is what the Numenorians believe when somebody drowns in the ocean. The sea is always. It's yeah. Okay. So
we're done.
It's profound.
It's profound. Certainly, completely profound. All right, first one. This tale is told on the headlands. The Great One comes up from the deeps. His eye is as a shrouded pearl. His voice, the ocean wind.
It sounds like Lovecraft.
It's not Tolkien. The style. the metaphorical, his voice, the ocean wind, is not. I don't know. That doesn't sound like Tolkien to me. I don't. You say you don't read, Dan, but you bring right away. You bring up Lovecraft. So
This sounds like the kinds of authors that try to imitate biblical verse from like the Book of Job, or there's a movement in fantasy. Brandon Sanderson does it sometimes when he's inventing poems at the beginning of his chapters in his books. But yeah, Lovecraftian. This is trying a little too hard to be deep and mysterious through. Yeah, so I agree. I don't think I'm going to vote no on this one. This is not Tolkien.
Right. I'll let me look what the answer is. Oh wait, can I? Let me check, because I want to make sure that I'm not going to answer all of them at the. Oh, I think is it going to highlight all of it at the same time? Yeah.
Well, why don't we go through all four and then
go through all four first
and say our guesses.
So next
we're
one is.
We're all saying that's not that one.
It's not that one.
Unless I'm saying that to fool you guys, so that I can go back at the end and say that.
Ooh, this is like double jeopardy. Harsh was the rift that the wave hewed in the wall of my father's kin. I know it stands unfilled and open, my son's breach that the sea wrought. This is no verse that Tolkien would write, in my opinion. I'm not sure what it's supposed to be. There's no. Do you know? Is this a specific kind of verse? Can you tell?
I think I can.
Oh,
I think. Yeah.
Yeah. It doesn't sound like Tolkien to me.
Okay. What do you think?
I already have my answer by reading them all. I'm pretty sure I know which one. But
okay.
Dan, do you have any thoughts?
I have no idea, but it does sound kind of weird, the way it anthropomorphizes the sea. I don't know if that's something that Tolkien
that's a good point.
Would do.
I think he might sometimes anthropomorphize the sea, but I do think so. This is like Viking verse. This is from the Nordic people. So there is a bit of what Tolkien does in this, but this is. I mean, you have the sea opening a rift in a wall of his father's kin. So you have a settlement of some kind, the sea gashing open the wall, and he calls it my son's breach for some reason. I don't know why, but the way the construction works, this is really smacking to me of a kind of Nordic verse of some type. I could be wrong, but it feels like Nordic verse to me.
There's certainly no alliteration. If it was
which makes it.
And it threw me. Harsh was the rift that the wave hewed. Like I was going there when I first read it, but
which to me is why I think it's more likely a translation of something Nordic. I do think there's because it is beautiful. It has a kind of poetic quality to it, but it doesn't feel like English is its first language, but it is. But it's very harsh and severe. I think it's Nordic, but I don't think it's Tolkien.
Okay, all right. So next one is, and as he went, he saw that the sun was sinking low into a great black cloud that came up over the rim of the darkening sea, and it grew cold, and there was a stirring and murmur as of a storm to come. I'm pretty sure this is Tolkien. This one, and the reasoning is, as I said earlier, like there's like. Tolkien uses more as of rather than like direct. The storm was the storm's murmur. He doesn't really say that there was a murmur as of the storm to come. That's what tipped me off, and it just sounds like I feel like I've read this. I can't pinpoint exactly where the breaker that came up over the rim of the darkening sea, and it grew cold, and there was a stirring.
You got it, man. You got it. I know this is not much of a contest now because we're seeing it. Yeah, this is as soon as you said I've read this before. Okay. I think I know what this is. This is Tolkien. Sorry, Dan. This is Tolkien. Yep.
My guess is that this is Tolkien.
Well done, sir. Well done. Do we get extra points? Because I think I know what the fourth one is. Or I don't know if I know.
Sure. We can go to the fourth one here. The nearer waves, though golden, where their summits caught the light, were green on their slopes. First emerald and lower down, the lustrous bottle green. That doesn't sound like Tolkien. Deepening to blue, where they passed beneath the shadow of other waves.
So it may not be him, but the slopes of waves and the descriptions, it feels to me like Paralandra. This is from C.S. Lewis, the describing of the mountains of waves and how they were basically the landscape,
and then the land masses that would go over them.
Right,
interesting, or the masses of floating plants.
Correct. It doesn't. Yeah. I mean, if they had put in a description of the plants, they would have been a dead giveaway. But I don't. But I'm not sure. I mean, it could be. It may just be a description of a mountainous wave.
All right. Okay. So let's go to the answers then. Here we go. The first one is Tad Williams' Shadow March.
Never read it.
Never read it either. So never heard of that.
Not that one.
Tad
Not that
Williams.
one.
I know I've heard the author, but that's a more modern.
Is it the one before this one?
Sorry, yeah, it's this one. This tale is told on the headlands. Tad Williams, right? He's a modern author, isn't that right? I have never read him.
I have not either, but I do like Dan's. It feels like Lovecraft. This feels like a creature from a Lovecraft poem. The great one from the deeps. The eye is a shrouded pearl, so like this, and a voice like the ocean wind. You can feel this howling voice, and
Okay.
Anyway,
all right. Next one is. I'm sorry, I can't copy and paste this here because this is not an editable version of the slideshow. So,
sure.
And sorry, those of you who are listening, like if you go to YouTube and watch it there, you can read the quotes as we're going along with it. All right. Michael, impressive. This is from Egil's Saga. This is the harsh was the rift that the wave hewed in the wall of my father's kin. Egil's Saga, Egil. One of the Icelandic sagas attributed to Snorri Sturluson.
My second favorite author. Just kidding. Snorri. Yeah.
Wasn't she one of the Harfoots in Rings of Power? Snorri, the one that slept all the time.
Right. The eighth dwarf from the seven dwarves. Snorri.
Father of Sleepy.
No, I've never read this, but Icelandic saga. All right.
Yeah, you were right.
Sense.
So next one is Tolkien of Tour and is coming to Gondolin in Unfinished Tales.
So this is right before, if I'm right, it's right before Ulmo appears. So the sea is darkening as Tuor looks out and Ulmo appears to him.
That's also is that also in the Silmarillion?
A different version of it is.
Different version, but this one might not be precisely. Yeah, impressive. It certainly wasn't the Lord of the Rings, but impressive, Michael, that you've got that there. And
it's my favorite scene. Like one of my favorite pieces of artwork, probably maybe my favorite piece of artwork about the Valar is the appearance of what happens next after this paragraph in I think it's an Alan Lee painting that he does of when Ulmo appears. So it's pretty cool.
And so if we
you helped me because you said I've read this before, and I was thinking, okay, I thought the same thing. Yep, there it is.
Yeah, by John Howe, Ulmo and Tuor. Yeah, cool. Better than some of the other Ulmos. I think Ted Nasmith's Ulmo is a little too SeaWorld, but this one I like.
That's right.
Yeah. All right. So last one is the nearer waves, the golden where their summits caught the light were green on their slopes. It's from Paralandra.
It is. All right.
It is. Wow, Michael. That's great. That's amazing. You must read or something a lot.
Well, I was shamed by being wrong last time. I put my I don't know. It is interesting. I know Lewis and Tolkien pretty well, and I know you know Tolkien real well too. And so the styles of their writing is, when you said the as if, that was exactly my clue in the third quote. Like Tolkien loves similes that begin with as if.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes.
And so yeah. Yeah.
Wow. Thanks, Lynn. That was awesome. So we all got it right.
Good for us.
Yeah, my logic was spot on.
Sorry, man. You're at a disadvantage. It's like Dan's never read anything, and he's just kind of along for the ride, hoping his
what we should have done is just written down a number first before we started talking about it, and then held up our number at the end.
Yeah. I do agree that I like the way Tolkien writes when he's describing things. I think you're right, where he uses simile quite a bit, and he doesn't say this is like this. He says it's as of.
As if,
You get the picture in your mind, and he's not so much painting a one-to-one analogy, but he's saying it has these qualities. It's as of this or that. Yeah.
Right. It's an older kind of construction. Also, he likes words like darkening and lightning. Right. The darkening of Valinor, and there was darkening in this one.
And murmur.
Murmur. Yes. Yeah. Oh, he loves murmur.
Yeah, the first quote where they say his eye is as a shrouded pearl, his voice the ocean wind. That, like, when somebody says his voice the ocean wind, that's totally not. Tolkien never wrote in that style at all. Anyway, that is certainly somebody trying to emulate something greater than he is, and that would be Tad Williams of Shadowmarch. Which I don't know. Maybe he's good. I'm guessing.
Maybe he's good. Look, all you Shadowmarch fans, we're not yanking your chain.
Okay, I will tell you, my least favorite author that tries to be like Tolkien is Terry Brooks. I can't stand the Sword of Shannara, and I know there are people that like it, but I think there are people that read those before they actually read Tolkien. I had a friend of mine recommend those to me, and I couldn't even finish the third book. Halfway through, I'm like, this is so dumb.
See, I knew I liked you, Jonathan. I hate those books. I threw it away after the first one at first, and then later on, because a friend kept coming back to me and telling me how awesome it was, I read the second, the third, and I've never stopped halfway through a book before, and I did.
That's so funny that you. I got through the first two, but it was the third one, the Elf.
Wish Song.
Was it Elfstone? Maybe it was Elfstones that I would.
Elfstones is the second, I think.
It was the Wish Song. I just remember, I'm like, they're on another quest. They have to go get some MacGuffin, and something happens, and they're bad guys along the way. Yay! I'm gonna go read something else. And it was at that point I probably went to, like, something better, like C.S. Lewis, or maybe I found at that point Robert Jordan or something. But
or a dictionary,
it was
or
bad.
Something better.
A dictionary. I just went and read definitions.
It's good for what it is, and what it is something to avoid.
Well said.
Indeed. All right. Well, that was awesome. Okay, so we are on to chapter 13 of The Return of the Noldor, and that means that we get to start with
Dad's Big Thought.
All right. Thanks for that intro, Jonathan. I kind of struggle with coming up with a big thought when these chapters become more narrative, where it's, this happened and then this happened and then they came over here and then this happened. And but I did find it interesting how you have kind of like Feanor's big last hurrah. He's finally in Middle Earth, and he's basically spurned the Valar, and I'm just going to go and do what I need to do to get my Silmarils back and avenge my enemy. And you see how that pride goes before the fall, how he's fey in battle, and he just keeps charging, and he's basically like just relying on his own. Like, I am strong. I can do it. I think Tolkien even writes, even if he could see, or if he knew that Thingol was impenetrable, that it was unassailable, he still would have done it anyway. You have that contrasted with later on in the chapter, where you have, I think he's part of Fingolfin's company. It's Fingon. Did I say that right? Fingon? Mm-hmm. He's the son of Fingolfin, and he does a similar kind of mission where he goes out under the cover of darkness, and he's looking for Feanor's son, Maethros, right?
Maethros, yeah.
Maethros, but he goes out there and he's cautious and he's careful, and he's not out there to get revenge. He's out there to look for a friend, and it's a friend that he's been estranged from because of the ship burning and being left behind, so he's going out and looking for somebody who had betrayed him. So he's actually coming over into Middle Earth. I'm talking about Fingon. He's there almost kind of like as a contrast to Feanor, that he's a person of faith. And we'll talk about it later, I'm sure, but like he actually prays to Manwë, and Manwë hears his prayer and helps him. And I thought that was like an interesting contrast. So you have Feanor, who's, I'm going to do this all on my own. I'm strong. I'm powerful. I don't care what happens to me. I'm just going to do it. And you have Fingon, who is, I kind of took him to be like a person of faith in this chapter, and I thought that was a really interesting contrast.
Yeah, and the Maethros-Fingon relationship is actually established in the earlier chapter of the Flight of the Noldor, where when Maethros asks Feanor, his dad, he says, "So now what ships and rowers will you spare to return, and whom shall they bear hither first? Fingon the Valiant?" That was Maethros asking it, and so even in something like the Silmarillion, the relationship is set up even with just that phrase earlier, and I love that it's resolved in something so potent as what Fingon does with Maethros.
I really love that story too, Dan. It shows us so many things. So in the midst of this tale of the doom of the Noldor, I mean, Tolkien explicitly in our reading tonight, he references basically the fact that they're fated to fail 3 different times. But even in the midst of this doomed effort of the Noldor, you have this wonderful tale of heroism that comes up where Fingon rescues his friend Maithros. So Fingon is there's going to be a lot of elves. So for our listeners, we should probably reference from time to time, just put pigs. Maybe we should throw a picture up next episode of the major houses so people can get the name straight, because there's a lot of elves that start with the letter F. So it's
that's a good idea.
It's a little different.
F'n Elves.
Zing. Well done, sir. So Fingon is the oldest son of Fingolfin. So you have 3 sons of Finwë, who is dead. Finwë is their father. He was killed by Morgoth back in Valinor. So he has 3 sons: Feanor, Fingolfin, and Finarfin. Of those 3 sons, 2 of them are now in Middle-earth. Finarfin, the third and the wisest of the sons, repented after the doom of Mandos and went back with a small portion of the Noldor and begged forgiveness of the Valar and was accepted and never came to Middle-earth. So you have Finarfin, the third son, is back with some of the Noldor back in Middle-earth, back in Valinor. The other 2 are here. So Feanor's here and Fingolfin is here. And Feanor is, of course, with his sons and their people, and they have abandoned Fingolfin to the grinding ice. So now, of their sons, we have 7 from Feanor, who I'm not going to go through and list all of them. I'm just going to reference the fact that the oldest is Maithros the Tall. And he seems to also be the noblest of Feanor's sons. Both, we find that out, like you said, Jonathan, because he calls upon the friendship that he has with Fingolfin, Fingolfin's son, Fingon, his cousin. Mm-hmm. And also, in this chapter, we see his nobility too, although first, so he's captured and he's hung from a cliff, pinioned by his right arm up on a cliff by Morgoth to basically slowly die. And this is Maithros. So he's saved by Fingon, as Dan said. So there's our reference points. But when Fingon, oh yeah, great. We got the picture up here for those of you that can see. Yep, John Howe's picture of Maithros hanging there from the cliff. And the act of saving him by Fingon, and the tale of Fingon saving of him is really kind of epic in a lot of ways. First of all, we have an act of pure friendship here, right? So there are more forces in the world than just revenge or doomed fate. Okay, so friendship has always been a key force for Tolkien, and we see it embodied here. We also see prayer, like you said. He prays to Manwë, but before he prays, he sings. Because, of course, there can be no Tolkien chapter without singing. Someone's singing somewhere. So he sings a song of Valinor in defiance of all the orcs and Morgoth who are behind the walls of this mountain that we're looking at here. And so he sings this beautiful song, and Maithros, far above him, although he doesn't know that Maithros is there, answers him, and that's how we know where he is. But he can't get to him. So he prays to Manwë. Manwë sends an eagle, the king of the eagles, Thorondor. And he flies up. But then there's still tragedy because he can't cut through this sorceress pinion, this steel chain or band that's pinning Maithros to the cliff. And so he has to ultimately cut off Maithros' hand and slices it off and then bears him back. Oh, that's a great one. That's a good picture. And bears him back, and he's wounded. It did remind me in the later part of the chapter, because the later part of the chapter I call the Balerian Game of Thrones, the beginning of Balerian Game of Thrones, because there's all these elf nobility that start machinations and political machinations. Well, it's funny to me, although I'm sure George R.R. Martin would start throwing things in my head if he heard this, is that there's a major prince in Martin's Game of Thrones who is also a oldest son and a fine warrior who loses his hand as well. And then, but unlike him,
so funny.
The elves are better. So Mithros in Tolkien's version becomes even better with his left hand at his sword than his right, while Jaime Lannister does not in George R.R. Martin's. So anyway, so there's a lot of so that you have this heroic tale, which I just love, and then he carries him back.
Yeah, I like you the Game of Thrones part really starts when Thingol is introduced into the story, right? That's what you're referring to, where Tolkien writes, "Now King Thingol welcomed not. No, he did not welcome with a full heart the coming of so many princes in might out of the west, eager for new realms, and he would not open his kingdom nor remove its girdle of enchantment. For wise with the wisdom of Melian, he trusted not the restraint of Morgoth would endure. Trusted not that the restraint of Morgoth would endure." So he saw the coming of the elves as a problem because it would just incite Morgoth more to be a problem, because he already was a problem. Thus, they had the girdle of Melian protecting them in Menegroth. But we see that they laugh. They laugh like the I don't know what's the right word for the personality, the approach that the sons of Feanor take towards them. They are
dismissive. Oh, you mean towards Thingol?
Towards Thingol.
Yes, they're just, well, here's the quote from Mithros. Now, I have to say that Mithros, before this point, after being rescued, showed tremendous wisdom and healed the rift between him. Remember, he and his brothers, along with their father, who's now dead, had burned the ships and abandoned their kin. And now the kin have, against all odds, come across the grinding ice at great loss and entered Middle-earth. And we got to talk a little bit about the beginning of the chapter because we've jumped into the latter parts. Yeah. But let's just say, anyway, before we go back to that, let's say that Mithros, before this, has actually shown his wisdom, and he begged forgiveness from Fingolfin and his sons, which is an act of great humility that none other of the sons of Feanor have yet shown. And so he heals the rift. So now the Noldor are not at odds with each other, although they do live apart from each other, but they don't. Or actually, in a way, they do live very close. But anyway, but in this case, you have Angrod, son of Finarfin. So Finarfin, by the way, has 4 sons and 1 daughter. So Finarfin is the guy.
Do you remember all this, or do you have this written down? Because how do you remember this person that has 4 sons and 1 daughter? I'm like, oh my gosh, dude.
Sorry. So I do remember all this. This is not written down. But I have to go. I did have to do a recap when we started reading Silmarillion, because there's so many. So, but the one daughter is the most famous. So the Galadriel is the daughter of Finarfin, and so, but her 4 brothers, of one of whom is Finrod, who makes his appearance in Rings of Power, sadly. But one of the other ones, Angrod, one of her other 4 brothers, is the one that goes to Thingol, and he's the only one that's allowed in the realm. Why? Because his mother is akin to Thingol, and so through her being a daughter of Olwe, and so of the Sea Elves, and so there's a so the only one that's allowed in.
And
so
Olwe is the brother of Thingol, right?
Yes.
Olwe, yes. Okay.
Yes, and so you have. So their mother is Thingol's niece, if you want to be specific. Right. So anyway, so Thingol basically tells them, he says, "Look, you can't settle in my land in this protected forest, but I'll give you all the lands between me and Morgoth. You can settle in all those." And when that message comes back, the oldest son of Feanor, who's the one-handed now, Mithros the one-handed, says, this is his quote, he says, he laughs, saying, "A king is he that can hold his own, or else his title is vain." In other words, Thingol's a king because he can hold what's his own. "Thingol does but grant us lands where his power does not run. Indeed, Doriath alone would be his realm this day but for the coming of the Noldor. Therefore in Doriath let him reign, and be glad that he has the sons of Finwë for his neighbors, not the orcs of Morgoth that we found. Elsewhere it shall go as seems good to us." So Jonathan's put up this map, and this is a great map. This is found on page 14 and 15 of the Atlas of Middle-earth. It's this map in one shot tells you basically everything that's happening in this chapter is going to take place on this map. And so the bottom center of the map is the top of the forest of Doriath, where Thingol lives. The bottom center, not Darthonian. Yep, there you go, Jonathan. For those watching on YouTube, and so basically, Thingol says to the sons of Feanor, "Go ahead and all the rest of the Noldor, go ahead and settle everywhere else. Settle between me and Angband, me and between my people and Morgoth." So they split up and start going everywhere, and Jonathan's going crazy with the red red arrows. It's fun.
Settle.
Actually.
He's basically setting them up in the no man's land. He's like, you guys can camp out on those hills right in between me and Morgoth.
And Mithros knows this and points it out, laughing that basically he doesn't have control over these lands, but he's told us we can settle here.
Have them anyway, sure.
Yeah, and so Mithros says, sure, we'll do that, and basically whatever we say goes in these lands. So in other words, Thingol his word doesn't hold any power here. And we're establishing our own kingdoms, which we knew they came to do, and we knew even Galadriel desired to do. And that was one of the establishment of a kingdom was a major motivation that she had, and the other sons of Finarfin and Fingolfin and Feanor. So here they are. Well, but maybe we should go back and talk about the fate of Feanor, since we've referenced him as dead.
Right? Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. No, they say start in the middle when you tell a story, so we're just starting in the middle of the chapter. It's perfectly fine.
You do get a cool story with some Balrogs. That's pretty cool.
Multiple Balrogs, and the first named Balrog.
Yeah, and it starts off. It starts up right where we left off after they burned the ships, because it's the burning of those ships that are not only seen by Fingolfin but also by the orcs and the Watchers of Morgoth. So immediately Morgoth is like, "Oh crap! Okay, I'm not going to let this stand," and immediately sends out a host. Does it say how long it took? But it wasn't long. The host of Morgoth, roused by the tumult of Lamoth and the light of the burning at Loscar, came through the passes of Arid Wethrim. Oh my gosh. Okay, on this map right there. It came through the passes somewhere in here, I'm guessing.
Yes.
There's Arid Wethrim. And then the burning, Loscar, the burning is up in there on the left-hand side in that little bay. Right?
Okay, well, I think we're slightly off there, because I think they're in the Grey Fields of Mithrim. So it's the pass right above that, Ethel-Syrian, that pass right there. That says Ethel-Syrian on there, because it says that in the Grey...
Right there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And there on the Grey Fields of Mithrim
simple.
was fought the second battle of the Wars of Beleriand. Right. Dagor Nuin Gileath, that is named the Battle Under the Stars. Remember, everyone, there's no sun and moon yet, so everything is only under stars. So the Battle Under Stars happens there. Morgoth sends his forces. He doesn't have much respect for the Noldor, doesn't know their might. Remember, the only Noldor he's ever faced has been Finwë, who didn't have any weapons probably in his house, and he slew the High King of the Noldor back into Valinor. So he doesn't have many. And he's been building an army for the conquering of all of Beleriand, and his army has fought. His armies have actually pushed back the elves everywhere except in the forest of Doriath. So... we read about that in a few chapters ago.
I like how they get off the boats and they just march up, and they're basically like right on the doorstep of Morgoth. Like they're just like, oh, well, let's set up camp here, and they're like the mountain right there.
It's right.
Yep, they're setting up in Heathlam, and then later on they go right up to the doors and they bang on the doors. In fact, when Fingolfin gets there, what's interesting is remember the Noldor are terrifying in battle, and this is the first time that Morgoth finds this out. He sends this massive army from the Angband, and the army gets slaughtered. And then a second army comes up to try to kind of pincer move the elves from the south, and this was the army that was fighting against Círdan, the shipwright. And this army comes up, and they get slaughtered. And basically, he's left with almost nobody that in this first battle.
If you look here in what I'm showing, it's this. I know it's an overlay of the other map, but this in this bottom half of this map here is where the advancing orcs and the Balrogs, and then you can see this is where in the Mithrim that they fought their first battle.
Right.
And the host of Feanor.
And you see those black lines up from the southwest.
Yeah.
Those are the other armies of the orcs that come up to try to fight them, and they get smashed. Yeah. And so the Noldor win so handily that Feanor just keeps chasing him all the way back to Angband and gets himself separated. And take it from there, Dan. What happens to Feanor?
Well, Feanor, as we're told in Tolkien, his prose, he's saying that he's fey in battle, and he's just charging after the retreating armies, and he's just willing to chase after them, and he wants to get to Morgoth like right away, and he's even running ahead of his own people. He's just out there by himself basically.
That's right.
And it sounds like he's wounded in battle. The Lord of all the Balrogs strikes him down. And Gothmog. And then the backup comes. So then his sons arrive, and they're able to kind of carry him away and retreat a little bit, but he's mortally wounded at that point. And what's interesting to me is that they're carrying him out of the battle, and he looks down and he's able to see finally for the first time the fortress, the Thangol. It's impossible. We never had a chance. We could have never, with all of our force, we could have never assaulted that. And then as he's dying, he makes his sons reaffirm their oath to keep attacking Morgoth. It's like, this is a pointless quest, but I want you guys to avenge me. And I just thought that's the hubris of that, of like, I want all my sons to die in battle, even though it's hopeless or pointless. This is the oath we have taken. Now all of you keep the course, basically.
See, and this to me, that's so perfect. Dan, I was going to read that passage, and we'll read it, and then I'll give you my thought. Then his sons raised up their father and bore him back towards Mithrin. But as they drew near Eifel Syrian, and were upon the upward path to the pass over the mountains, Feanor bade them halt, for his wounds were mortal, and he knew that his hour had come.
So they're right here at the top of this pass.
That's right, looking back
at
towards
Thingol.
Yes. And looking out from the slopes of arid Wethering, with his last sight, he beheld far off the peaks of Thangol, mightiest of the towers of Middle-earth, and knew with the foreknowledge of death that no power of the Noldor would ever overthrow them. But he cursed the name of Morgoth thrice, and laid it upon his sons to hold to their oath and to avenge their father. Then he died, but he had neither burial nor tomb, for so fiery was his spirit that as it sped, his body fell to ash and was borne away like smoke. And his likeness has never again appeared in Arda, neither has his spirit left the halls of Mandos. So he unlike other elves, he doesn't get to leave the halls of Mandos, and so it's so true what you said, Dan. Here is the power of suicidal hatred. So he hates so much that he even dooms his own sons, who you have to think are the people he loves most in the world, if indeed he loved. But I would make the argument now he loves no one in the world. It's clear. If you doom your own children, knowing that you're sending them to their death, then you have no love. And so, his flame has completely been burnt out.
Yeah, the only thing he loved, that, remember, it was his father's death. That is one of the things, the Silmarils and his father's death, the two things he loved the most. And so, yeah, I would agree with you and say that, yeah, he, at this point, the fire of his revenge, his vengeance, had consumed him too. I could say, the fire of his body, but there was no hope left. And we'll see that this final commitment, this final curse, and the oath that he recommits his sons to at his death leads to so much more.
Yes.
So many problems.
Yeah, it just doesn't end. There's these three quotes. I'm just going to lay two of them. Thus, because of the curse that lay upon them, the Noldor achieved nothing, while Morgoth hesitated, and the dread of light was new and strong upon the orcs. This is after the rising sun and moon. And then again, later in the chapter, therefore, even as Mandos foretold, the house of Feanor were called the dispossessed, because the overlordship passed from it, the elder, to the house of Fingolfin. And then there's a third quote, which I don't have at my fingertips. Anyways, it references basically the fate of the Noldor and their diminishment and their hopelessness multiple times even in this first half of this chapter. So Tolkien is very clearly laying out for us that this tale is not going to end well. But nevertheless, watch the Game of Thrones happen. And so it's really, although better than Game of Thrones, he has tales of real heroism, like the friendship between Fingon and Maithros, the humility of Mithros and the healing of wounds. And there are good things that happen. The Grey Elves, for example, are very happy to see the Noldor. Things were hopeless. Morgoth had them against the ropes, and then all of a sudden, out of unlooked for, these Noldor appear, who basically Morgoth can't touch. He's just they scythe through all of his armies, and so it seems like good news to them. And then a second force of them appear. I do want to read about that too. But did you guys have any thoughts about the relationship between Fingolfin?
Now you're on a roll. You go, Michael. We're here to listen right now too.
He's oh, geez, no, I feel bad. But I love this imagery. So we have when Fingolfin arrives. Let's see. But as the host of Fingolfin marched into Mithrim, the sun rose flaming in the west, and Fingolfin unfurled his blue and silver banners, and blew his horns, and flowers sprang beneath his marching feet, and the ages of the stars were ended.
That was the first rising of the sun.
Right.
Because the sun is rising where?
In the west.
In the west.
Exactly.
Which is interesting. Anyway.
Yeah. Exactly right. Which is appropriate. The sun's rising in the west because it's coming from Valinor.
From Valinor, mm-hmm. Right.
Which is in the west.
It's basically like a UFO. It goes up and then it starts going.
It does all kinds of funny things at first. Look. They had to work the process out. There was a there was a lot of inefficiency in the first part of the process. And then the sun and moon got their act together. We heard from the end of a few chapters ago that the Fingolfin's people blew their trumpets. This is kind of their second arrival. So back on the map that Jonathan had up before, when they first arrived off the Helcaraxe, so on the far left of the map, they blew their trumpets at the rising of the moon. Because remember, the moon rises first. Mm-hmm. So that's them on the far left. And then when they reach the Mithrim, where the battle was just had, that's when the sun rises. So they're marching across, and then the sun rises for the first time. And what's really awesome, brings up my imagination starts to run wild at this. And I don't know if you guys have ever considered I know, Dan, this is your first time reading, but I don't know if, Jonathan, you've ever thought about this. What kind of flora was there in Middle-earth in the Age of the Stars? It can't be the kind of flora that exists there now with the sun that needs the kind of sunshine to grow. It had to be a different kind of flora. And I think Tolkien's giving us a hint to that because he gives us two hints. The lesser hint is the one I just read, where Fingolfin flowers spring up around the feet of his people as they're marching at the rising of the sun. So clearly the flowers are opening in the face of they've been waiting for the sun. So Yavanna has prepped this moment, and the flowers are opening, which means there were no flowers before, or at least there weren't these kinds of flowers.
Yeah, and that it's what was written in the previous chapter where Tolkien writes that Yavanna, long ages before, in the thought of Yavanna, sown as seed in the dark, came at last to their budding and their bloom, which is like there was all this stuff ready to be released at the rising of the sun, which I guess you could say was part of the song.
It is. And isn't that interesting? Because look, so if you're Yavanna, you're over in Valinor, and you've had 2 ages, 3 technically, one without any light, and then there's the lamps, the ages of the lamps, right? Mm-hmm. And then there's the ages of the 2 trees. And in both those cases, the light is confined to a specific area. But somehow Yavanna knows, probably because of her connection to this part of the song in which she is the strongest, she knows that a light is going to come to Middle-earth, so she precedes Middle-earth for all these plants that are going to only spring up and open and begin their life when the sun and moon come up. Now, I don't know if she knows about the sun and moon, but she is the one that created the 2 trees, and she is the one that coaxed forth the fruit and the flower that became the sun and the moon. So I got to think that there's some connection with her in the song.
I agree. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I've never thought about it, though, as in that sort of visual way that where being the first rising of the sun and everything is first growing around you as you march. Mm-hmm. I love that visual. Imagine if they would have done something like that on TV instead of what we got. That would have been amazing. Like all these sorts of these. Well, they couldn't do it. I understand they didn't have the rights, but man, these visual things that we get in Tolkien, and we just didn't get anything like that. It's still
I don't buy the whole they didn't have the rights argument in this particular case. I don't think there's any way, because Tolkien doesn't say explicit. I don't think there's any way that you're going to get sued if you show a vision of the elves arriving in Middle Earth somehow, and then plants springing up.
Yeah.
I just don't. I think that's too indirect. Tolkien just has this one passage which we are drawing logical conclusions from, but I don't think it's copyrighted.
No. Well, that's probably true. I guess we should go to what's closer to the end of the chapter, which is where we got our first glimpse of more dwarf. Well, our glimpse of the dwarves and the Noldor coming together.
Yes.
And sadly, it's with Caranthir.
Yes.
Who is, as Tolkien writes, Caranthir, who loved not, was the harshest of the brothers and the most quick to anger. So probably the worst guy to come into contact with the dwarves first from Valinor.
And what does he think of the dwarves? Caranthir thinks they're ugly. That's what he thinks. I don't like them because they're ugly.
The people,
and Caranthir was haughty and scarce concealed his scorn for the unloveliness of the Naugrim, and his people followed their lord.
But the only thing that brought them together, it was like the USSR and America, right? They hated Morgoth and they made an alliance. They hated the Nazis and they made an alliance. It's the same sort of thing. So that once that, you can tell, like even as the story progresses, once that sort of common enemy is gone, you lose even more so. Except for Elrond and Durin, they were great friends for many, many years. Sorry, guys. Sorry, I couldn't help but bring up those. All right. But again, it's the Noldor and the dwarves. The first Noldor, who are the greatest craftsmen, the crafts elves, to meet the Naugrim. Even though Menegroth, the Thousand Caves of Thingol, was bedecked and was created by the dwarves already. Is this the first time the dwarves have kind of, when they start seeing this, have they met their match in a way? Like, I'd be curious to see, like, there's a whole story that you could create around that. And some of the strife that would have come up between the Noldor and the dwarves as they realize, like, so we're not going to be able to woo them with all of our pretty things and all of our capabilities, like, because they've already got it. Unless they needed a big giant forge. Sorry,
that is a giant forge to do
just
what?
Keep coming
Nothing?
back to it. Just keep coming back.
It's so hard.
Can't escape.
All right. Any final thoughts on this part of the chapter? Next, and we're going to start with when 20 years of the sun had passed, which is the third break there. But any other final thoughts as we move on?
Well, the High Kingship has passed now to Fingolfin.
Oh, that's a good point.
So Fingolfin. Yeah, and I was thinking back on what I said earlier about all the people, and you were asking, like, how do I remember that? So here's a visual for some of our listeners, if you feel like it. You got, on the one hand, you got Feanor, and he's dead now, but he has 7 sons. On the other side, then you have his brother Fingolfin.
Isn't there a song of this? Father Feanor had 7 sons. Sorry.
Different song.
I'm just trying to think of a mnemonic device that's going to help me remember all this, because I'm not, like, my memory, like when I was in plays, memorizing lines was always the hardest thing. So I have random facts and things that get stuck in my head when I read stuff, but actually memorizing, like, facts and figures and things like that always seems so difficult for me. So I'm curious, like, how do you do that? How do you remember?
So what I remember oppositionally, so I think of it on 2 sides of the page. On one side of the page, we have the Feanorians from their father Feanor, and they have 7 sons. On the other side, opposing them, are the remaining sons of the brothers of Feanor. Now, one of those brothers is here. He's now the High King, Fingolfin, and the other one is back in Valinor. But from the 2 of them together, also 7 sons. So you have 3 and 4 sons, and then you have, oh no, that's not right. Sorry, you have 6 sons and 2 daughters. Sorry,
leading me astray.
So my bad. So anyway, on one side you have the 7 sons of Feanor. On the other side you have 6 sons, 2 and 4 from Fingolfin and Finarfin, and you have 2 daughters, Erithel and Galadriel. So those are the people from whom all these other Game of Thrones stories flow.
Right. Okay, now I can remember. There's one less than
That's right.
There's something
right. So Fingolfin is now High King, and the elves have settled in the lands between the protected forest of Doriath with Thingol and Melian, the Maiar, and in the north, Morgoth, who's now delving more and doing. We'll find out later that he's really burned about it being so easily handled by the elves, and so he begins to come up with new things to try to fight the elves because clearly orcs aren't going to cut it.
I do find it interesting. The thing that jumped out to me when reading this is it's interesting. I always look for significance when there probably isn't any. Like there's symbology or whatever, but it's interesting to me.
Allegory.
Yeah, it's interesting to me that when the host of Fingolfin arrives, the moon shows up. And then when they make it to the other elves, the sun is there. And then when they're marching and they unfurl their banners, the flowers spring up. It's almost like nature and the Valar, the creative powers in the earth. It seems like there's kind of like a redemptive thread almost. That's, and I'm probably reading way too much into it, but you have like Feanor, and he's just like, let's go kill him. We're all vengeance. We're with the oath, the oath. We're gonna go kill Morgoth, and then they have a bad end. And then you have Fingolfin's people show up, and it's a little bit different.
Yeah, I mean
they are different. This is why I love Fingolfin. It's always been my favorite. It's why on the Discord channel, anyone that pays attention, my symbol is the heraldic symbol of Fingolfin's house. Fingolfin himself has a tragic end, and it doesn't save the Noldor from their fate and the doom of Mandos and the vows they've taken. But you see them, Dan, trying to redeem themselves, and the Valar are helping them. Contrary to what I said last episode, we have the Valar taking a direct hand here, right?
Right.
Because Fingon prays to Manwë, and Manwë answers him directly and sends an eagle to help him. So you have direct action in order to, even though ultimately the Noldor are doomed, still the Valar care.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that really jumped out in this chapter. That was really cool.
And I don't think that you're reading too much into it because it supports, right? Just it may not mean a whole lot necessarily when it comes to like when you're talking about how the sun rose and then the flowers grew underneath their feet. It may not mean something in like in a way that's a direct simile or metaphor or allegory or something like that. But it supports that their coming was a brightness, was a good thing rather than Feanor's. And I like that because it shows you what's happening, and he's not just telling you like their coming was as the growth of new earth, or something like that. It was like, no, it is growing underneath them. This is actually what's happening. So
I totally agree, Jonathan. My final thought is going to be this. It is in contrast. We joke about how much we keep bringing up Rings of Power, which is unfortunately fresh in our minds, but there is a stark contrast.
I'm just going to do this.
Yeah.
Take out the headphones, shut down the microphone.
But now that I'm back to reading Tolkien again, I see just such stark difference. So Tolkien here is he has his overall tale of the Noldor is one of doom. They will diminish. All the things they seek to do will fall to nothing. But in the meantime, there is beauty and goodness in them. And so Tolkien gives us that vision that you pointed out of the arrival of Fingolfin and 3 stages and 3 different things happening. And all you have, why is he showing this to us? Because they are good, because they have beauty, because there is light. That's it. As opposed to in Rings of Power, when a random thing happens, why is it? It's so that we can know, we can take an inference about elves stealing people's jobs as like this is like look at our world and how people steal jobs. Some bigots think people steal your jobs, and it's, so the hackery is so pathetic compared for Tolkien. Why does he do this quote unquote random thing? What in this passage of this tale of tragedy that's going to unfold in the Silmarillion, he does it because there is goodness, and the elves are beautiful and good, and there is light, and the Valar still care about them. And so, and that's enough. That's all you need. It's not because of some political motivation or theme that has to be shoehorned into another story.
Yeah. I agree, and just like I was told on the Discord channel how the Rings of Power has ruined me. Apparently, it's ruined you too, and there's nothing you can do to.
I'm just going down. I'm going down on your ship, man.
All right. Well, that was an awesome review. We are deep into this here, so we got to move on because we have our extended podcast still to do, and we've got a few things to address there. But before we do, we have to tell you about things
If you like Tolkien.
And this week, I'm going to bring up something that was actually the podcast from a couple weeks ago. And that was an interview I did with Steve Babb of Glass Hammer, where 22 years ago, I think it was, they came out with this album, the Middle-earth album. So Glass Hammer is a band that's been around for a long time. They've been around, for 20, 30 years now, I think, and 20-some albums. And their style is prog rock, so it's... but it's not like just a throwback. It's not just a cover band. It's an actual style of their own that is quality, that's done with, a real dedication. And so when you listen to their music, it sounds really good. But they did this one album, the Middle-earth album, which the first half of it is, the whole idea was, what if there was a band playing in Bree? And what would it sound like at the Prancing Pony? And what would the audience sound like? And so you get an entire, like I think it's like 5 or 6 songs about, like as if there was a band in front. And I'm not talking like a band with a bass guitar and drums and an electric guitar. This is like it's definitely more medieval stylings, the music itself. Right. It feels like there's a harp and there's a lute and there's there's kind of a harpsichord in there too, which still works fine. Some people apparently didn't like that because that's too modern for it. But in any case, they have great songs in there. One of them is called, I think, The King's Beer. That's my favorite one.
It's a good one.
And then the last half is more prog rock. My favorite song of that one is called Sweet Goldberry. And it takes whole lines from the Lord of the Rings and about Goldberry and puts it into music. And so you can go to glasshammer.com to get it. You can go to Apple Music to get it. What you can't do is stream it. So it's not available on Spotify or YouTube Music or Apple Music for streaming. You have to download it to purchase it. So in any case, check it out. It's a great album. If you listen to our episode 2 episodes ago, where I interview Steve and we talk a little bit about, sadly, the Rings of Power, but also his music and then the book that he wrote. At the end of it, we have a song from their latest album, At the Gate. And then if you're a patron, you get 2 songs from this year at the end of that podcast too. The King's Beer and Sweet Goldberry, the 2 that I mentioned already, are in it. So yeah, check it out. It's a great album. It's a lot of fun. Really good guys. They're 2 hours away from me in Chattanooga. I'm near Nashville, so that's really great. Yeah. Have you guys ever heard it? If not, we'll have to make sure.
I need to. Yeah.
I hadn't heard it until I listened to the episode that you had them on, and then I went and listened. So I too liked. Fun. I enjoyed it. Prog rock is not my bag usually, but I did appreciate their work.
Yeah, and they're expanding. It's not just like straight up. Like they do experimental things too that are outside of that genre.
Like artists,
Like artists do. It's a crazy thing. All right, so next week we're in the second half of chapter 13 of The Return of the Noldor, starting with the phrase, let me make sure I get it right, when 20 years of the sun had passed. Mm-hmm. Look for that, and then to the end of the chapter, and we'll talk about all that. So thanks for being with us. If you want to hear the extended podcast, make sure that you become a patron by going to theonering.com/patron. That's where you get access to our Discord, to the Discord message boards, to the extended podcast. You get the extended podcast through your podcast player. You just have to have a working login. It's $4 a month, free for the first month, so you can check it out and then cancel if you don't want it. So we appreciate all of our patrons. We love the conversations we're having, and it's fun to get the questions from you, like our all that is gold does not glitter. I got to say it right. From Lynn this morning, whatever, we got it. I don't know. But they posted it, and they're like, hey, can we use this? And they're like, yeah, use it. So it was great. It was fun to have that. So we will see you next week when we do the second half of The Return of the Noldor. And for the rest of you extended podcast listeners, we'll see you in just a second after our condolences to all those who have to leave us now. I'm sorry.
Bye-bye. Bye.